Today's World Insights. China's Import Expo in full throttle, on the path to recovery. How it could benefit the world, in the words of the World Economic Forum founder.
What is needed is a global rules-based system.
And a new expo space for public health and pandemic prevention. What it means for big pharma companies from the Merck CEO.
Pharmaceutical industry is collaborating in an unprecedented way in finding solutions to this crisis.
This is Shanghai, and behind me it's its skyline. It's the largest city in China. It's a global financial hub. And in recent years, it takes on a new role, the city that hosts China's largest import expo, CIIE. Enormous amounts of investment have been put in here. The venues, the exhibition areas, and of course the prevention and control measures against the pandemic in this huge-scale event. But with many economies forced to a standstill due to the novel coronavirus outbreak, the opening of this import expo demonstrates China is ready to share its huge market opportunities and contribute to the world's economic recovery. But looking ahead, challenges do come in abundance. Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, knows all that too well. On the sideline of the CIIE, I had an exclusive interview with him. I asked him what he considers as the biggest risk among all the challenges the world is facing today, and how leaders, including business leaders, need to be prepared in the middle of constant change. It's an eventful year and eventful days recently. We still do not know at this time of the interview the result of the U.S. presidential election, but what do you make of the uncertainty even about the election itself, and certainly its impact for the next 4 years?
We have to be aware that independent of the election, we are in a situation with great uncertainty. And actually, we have at the moment 3 or 4 major challenges in the world. First, many countries still have to fight the virus. And then second, they have to reconstruct, they have to rebound. And I'm happy to know that China has gone through those 2 phases and is now in some way post-corona. But in the post-corona time, we have to define also new policies to make the world more cohesive, more resilient, more inclusive, and more sustainable. And here we have to deal simultaneously with quite a number of issues like revolutions, aging, and so on. So the world which we will face in the future will be a very turbulent, a very challenging world.
Will geopolitics be the major issue there? As China-U.S. relations has been a thorny issue for the world over the past 1 year or 2.
Yes, what we need, of course, is much more global cooperation. Of course, we are in a competitive situation, and it's clear that China and the U.S. as the 2 most important economic powers are in a particular stage of competition. But what we need is what I would call cooperative competition or competitive cooperation, which means competition should not be a fight. Competition should be to define what is in the common interest, what are our common issues, how should we address those issues, and of course there's still a competition going on, and I think China has well captured it in the dual circulation development, which means on the one hand to foster the internal market, and on the other hand, to see how simultaneously global cooperation could be strengthened.
But Professor, do you think the leaders would listen to your advice? You've been interacting with them for a long time. This is already your 13th U.S. presidential election as an observer over the past few decades. Do you think the leader would listen to you?
At least I hope so. And I'm quite optimistic because when we look back at the 50 years since I have created the World Economic Forum, the world has made substantial progress. Just look at China, look at quite other countries where poverty is being substantially reduced and so on. I believe in an always better future for humankind. So I also believe that at the end, even if we have different opinions, that we will recognize, as President Xi expressed it in Davos in 2017, we are part of a global community with a common destiny. So I think at the end we will have the force and the willingness to address those issues which require global responses together.
Then, Professor, what do you consider as the big uncertainty, or shall I say the biggest uncertainty, if it's about geopolitics? Would that be the uncertainties of the U.S. leadership for the next 4 years? Or it is going to be the rise of China, which most in the world, particularly in the West, still have a lack of knowledge, shall I say, at this moment?
I think it's not just one challenge. Of course, cooperation between the U.S. and China will be key to address many of the challenges which we face. We have black swans in the world. We were very surprised by the COVID-19 virus, which had a very damaging effect on the global economy. But there are other issues to be resolved, and we do not know, by the way, we do not know whether we will not have to fight another virus in the near future. But let me just address one of the challenges which we have. The fourth industrial revolution, based on the research which the World Economic Forum has done, will require to retrain and to reskill and upskill about half of the present workforce around the world in the next 10 years. Because we need new skills, we need new cases. The new technologies have a strong structural impact in many ways on our individual lives, but also and particularly on the labor market. So how to make sure that everybody has decent work, I think will be one of the major challenges in the world. How we address also the issue of climate change. And I'm very glad to have heard the commitment of China to achieve a zero net situation by 2060. So many challenges to be resolved, and all of those require global cooperation.
Professor Schwab, in your latest book, The Great Reset, which will also has its Chinese version, by the way, congratulations on that. You talk a lot on the Great Reset, but that is depending on the time, or shall I say, the schedule of the pandemic. But we have seen the second wave, particularly with the winter approaching in different parts of the world. So when are we going to see, really, the reset that you emphasize once and again in that wonderful book?
Yes, China has to play a major role because it is out of what I would call the hot phase of the pandemic. Of course, we do not know how the virus at the end will evolve. Will it come back even in China? I don't hope so. But even those countries which are still in the, what I would call the hot phase, I think they have to think about the the post-corona era. And that's exactly what I'm addressing in the book. What are the deficiencies in our systems, in all our systems, the economic systems, social systems, geopolitical systems? What are the deficiencies, and how much are we now challenged to address those deficiencies? Let me just give one example. We had a tendency in the world towards a lack of equality and fairness, also driven by the fourth industrial revolution and driven in addition by the virus. We have the need to create much more, let's say, inclusive societies. We cannot leave people behind.
Having said that, the World Economic Forum has been very efficient when facing up to the pandemic. I remember very clearly, Professor, at the very beginning of this year when the World Economic Forum was underway, the news came out about COVID-19. And you have assembled experts and also leaders from the healthcare sector, from business sector, together to jump immediately on the issue and try to work out solutions and build a platform, just as you mentioned, Professor. But then it's a test of leadership, isn't it? At the time of crisis, whether people will be able to rush to the front line and do what they need to do and build, as you just said. But whether the leadership right now is up to the test, that's a big question mark. Professor Schwab, you've been dealing with leadership every year at the World Economic Forum. You ask them tough questions. You try to corner them into making commitment. But what do you think about the quality of leadership these days, Professor?
Yes, we just published our jobs report, and we defined the new skills which are needed today in a world which is overwhelmed by uncertainty and complexity. And those skills are problem solving, they are system thinking. You see, in the old world, you could extrapolate and you could see in which direction the world is moving, and you could see it with great probability. Today, there's uncertainty, and what we need is much more an approach where we create scenarios. What could happen? We at the Forum, for example, looking at the next annual meeting in Davos, we have to take different scenarios. We have to, next annual meeting, not necessarily in Davos, it could take place somewhere else. So we have to say what is happening if by early next year the vaccines give us the possibility to meet again. But then there's another scenario which is, no, we will be able to meet again only late next year. Or finally a scenario which means it will take until 22. So that's the world of today. You have to see what could happen, not what will happen, what could happen, and then to be prepared for each of those different scenarios. And to adapt very rapidly if the situation changes. So the word agility comes to my mind.
There are concerns, Professor, though, that what one talks about multilateralism might not be necessarily the multilateralism in the other's eyes. For example, there is a danger, some suggest, some politicians might use the phrase of multilateralism for small groupings and try to exclude some of the other countries. Maybe they try to do something among the developed economies through OECD and exclude the emerging economies and developing countries, and vice versa. So, Professor, how do you see really, how inclusive will multilateralism be? That's probably an interesting question, isn't it?
We do not know yet, and I think there are two scenarios. The first scenario is, of course, a positive one, that we have the courage to create win-win situations, to work together, I repeat, global cooperation, to address the issues and the challenges jointly. The other danger, which is the more pessimistic outlook, is the other scenario, which is really danger for the world economy, is that the world falls apart in different, let's say, regional groupings. That's what you have in mind. And we have to fight this situation as much as we can, because this will be a lose-lose situation. It will be coming back to a situation where when you travel around the world, you need different, let's say, technologies. You have, I remember the time when I traveled around the world 20 years ago. I had to take 2 or 3 phones because there were different standards. I think that's what we have to avoid. It's not in the interest of any individual and not in the interest of any country to create such a confrontational situation.
When you say we have to fight, who are the we that you are referring to? Is that the business that will be the partner? Is that the governments? Will governments be really looking at the same horizon? Are you talking about the civil society? You have been illustrating in the Great Reset, your latest book, about the different roles that different parties of the society these days could play. Who are you referring to, Professor, when you say we?
I think every stakeholder of global society is challenged here. It's a joint effort which is needed of governments, of business, of civil society. Everybody has to play its own, or has to make its own contribution so that the world falls not apart. And here, the World Economic Forum is certainly a platform to bring all those actors together with the objective to strengthen global cooperation.
In early November, the Shanghai Import Expo is taking place. You were there, Professor, over the past 2 years. So anything to share? Many believe this is a rare occasion for this year when the pandemic is still threatening us. It is an in-person exhibition, and the exhibition area has been even expanded this year than last year. So it's quite a showcase over there. It's also trying to showcase about cooperation. But Professor, do you think the message will get across?
Yes, I think it will be the first big event, in-person event. I think it will be very welcomed. Of course, we have learned to do video conferencing, and we have seen that video conferencing, virtual interaction, can replace in many ways coming together. And of course, this will have a major impact also in the future on the travel industry. But on the other hand, I think the personal contact is very important. I feel to really build trust, you need the personal contact. You have to look, I see you, of course, on the screen, but being together, it provides this feeling of, let's say, emotional linkage. And so I see an event like Shanghai now very important to show it's possible again to come together in person. And I'm also very optimistic about the future of the World Economic Forum, because many people have asked us, how will it impact the forum? I'm optimistic that people will have a need, maybe in a little bit different ways, to come in person together again. And it will be the combination of in-person and virtual interaction which will make interaction and cooperation particularly effective.
You're watching World Insight. Coming up, a new platform on public health and outbreak control at the 3rd CIIE. A big presence in this new space is farm giant Merck. A word with the company chairman and CEO after this break.
Pharmaceutical industry is collaborating in an unprecedented way.
Standing in the heart of Shanghai, one could not help but be amazed by how this city of 23 million and China as a whole of 1.4 billion people has managed to ride the waves of COVID-19 and could run a gigantic event like CIIE today. Stefan Oschmann, chairman of the executive board and CEO of Merck, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, was also curious about that. In our conversation, he brings the latest updates on the development of vaccines and the prospect of vaccine worldwide, and of course, shares his vision about the industry he's in now. And I'm glad to be joined by Stefan Oschmann, who is the chairman of the executive board and CEO of Merck. Mr. Oschmann, what a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
COVID-19, a big problem for every one of us. So what does that mean for pharmaceutical industry? I know you are not only responsible for the company Merck, which of course is a huge brand name in the industry, but also for the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry as well. So from your perspective, how do you see the challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, I used to serve as the chairman of EFPIA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry Associations. There is a successor right now, so I'm not in that role anymore, but I'm very much in touch with policymakers, healthcare officials, the science community. The science community in Europe, we see that COVID-19 is on the rise again in Europe. We've seen in Belgium, in several other European countries, numbers rising. So the pharmaceutical industry is collaborating in an unprecedented way in finding solutions to this crisis, whether it's vaccines, whether it's antibodies, whether it's antivirals, immunological compounds. And we're also working a lot with diagnostics makers. So we currently see through global collaborative efforts a wonderful spirit of working together in the face of this crisis.
12 vaccines already enter into the 3rd phase trial. And also we know that 5 out of them could be coming from China. Of course, we do not know the final results. So from your expertise, when shall we expect some specific results of a 3rd trial data regarding all of these tests, 3rd stage? And also, how can we expect about the timeline, Mr. Oschmann? I'm sure that's the question on everybody.
You presented the numbers correctly. There are about 200 vaccine projects worldwide. To my knowledge, 4 of them are in phase 3 in China. There are several other projects worldwide. They're different and very novel technologies. There's technologies such as messenger RNA, very exciting technology, viral vector vaccine, etc. We're expecting the first data out of these phase 3 trials within the next couple of weeks. It is difficult to predict, and I don't want to become too technical, but you can imagine that such trials must be valid statistically, so you have to have a certain number we would call events in such a trial, and nobody can predict this precisely, but we assume that we will see data very soon. If these data are positive, the manufacturers of these vaccines, the people who are developing the vaccines, are in close contact with the regulatory bodies worldwide, and the regulatory bodies have also assumed a different type of working style. So they're working day and night too. So we hope that we would have then a vaccine available soon. It needs to be scaled up. Merck plays a big role in supporting manufacturing of vaccines. We're supporting more than 50 vaccines projects.
Mm-hmm. We have been noticing certain signs, for example, coming from WHO earlier, the efficacy was being described needs to be at least 70% and above, and now it is considered to be at 60%. That's already quite significant. So what does that mean, Mr. Oschmann, that we are apparently lowering the bar for efficacy? Does it mean we have encountered enormous amount of challenge in terms to come up with the right vaccine at this moment?
Yeah, when assessing any novel medical technology, it's always about a risk-benefit assessment. What is the benefit that such a technology brings to patients, and what is the risk that it brings? And nothing is risk-free, so regulators have to say no vaccine is 100% effective. Humans are very different, and some humans have different reactions to vaccines. That's why we need to do such big phase 3 trials. So we need to prove that the vaccine works and that it is safe and well tolerated. The goal of a vaccination program must be risk reduction. COVID-19 is a terrible disease, but it creates a sort of what we call a lethality. That means a death rate of about 0.6% on average worldwide. So we need to be doing the right thing to manage that risk. And if we vaccinate high-risk populations first and have an acceptable percentage of efficacy, we would reduce the risk significantly so that we could go back to what we would say called normal life earlier.
Mr. Oschmann, thank you for the rich information you provided earlier regarding, but we have seen human beings encounter one after another tremendous challenge in terms of diseases. COVID-19 is only one of them. So how far are we, for example, scientific research from the real needs to combat all these diseases? I know you've been working on your scientific research side and on the priority of the company's research. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, in our healthcare business, we're focusing on two research areas. One is cancer or oncology, with a strong focus on so-called immuno-oncology, i.e. using our own immune system to fight cancer. And the other one is immunology. And immunology is a very, very important field of research where we can make a lot more progress to benefit patients. We see exciting technology developments in this area. We've seen over the past couple of years that, for instance, certain cancer types that were almost untreatable not so long ago can now be treated very effectively. So we're excited to be part of the research community in this area. We have introduced significant products in this area in difficult to treat cancers, in certain rare cancers such as merkel cell carcinoma, or in bladder cancer, and several other areas. So this is a field where the biopharmaceutical industry, together with academia and other partners, can really is achieving a lot of progress and can make a major contribution toward health.
On the other hand, Mr. Oschmann, as the chairman and the CEO of a global company, I'm sure you understand the complexity of geopolitics. Do you think they will hinder further cooperation among parties to work in life science and medical science?
We're watching this like anybody else, and we are concerned about certain trends. And if we look at the COVID crisis right now, we cannot say it's them and we are in this together. We are a global community, and we must act as a global community. And I'm excited by all these collaborative efforts that I was mentioning earlier on, whether it's through WHO, whether it's through the Gates Foundation, through other regional or global initiatives. And we can tackle this only if we work together. I'm not an expert at geopolitics. I just hope that reason will prevail.
Another thing I want to ask you is about the CIIE. Your company has been very active in setting up showcases within the exhibition. And how do you see the message this year? CIIE, the exhibition area has been even expanded than last year, even though this is a very difficult year for everyone. And meanwhile, global companies like yours have been working hard in order to showcase the best that you have to the global audience, especially here in China. How do you make up the significance of this event?
Well, we've always had a strong focus on China and a very strong team in China, and we've collaborated very closely with our team early in the COVID crisis, and we took many important lessons from our colleagues in China, and we're observing that China is managing this situation in a very decisive and very effective way. So we assume that the economic and technology weight of China in the global community will increase, or is actually increasing. So this is a very strong message. Secondly, we see that China has been really catching up in technology development and is leading in quite a few areas. If you look at the application of artificial intelligence in healthcare, for instance, we see that China is clearly in the lead. China has increased intellectual property protection, which is very important for our industry. China has improved the regulatory process for new drugs, so that is a much more favorable environment, and we're very happy to be involved in this. And CIIE is sort of a prime example of how these policies then translate into reality. I would have loved to be there. I was trying very hard to come to China. It was obviously not possible this year, but I hope that I'll be back soon.
Well, usually people have to go through the 14 days, but I guess for a global CEO like you, that will be very much a big chunk of your time. There is going to be the COVAX, that is a platform, as you may know very well, Mr. Oshman, for countries to come together and also bring the best products and possibilities as a global common good. But even after a vaccine comes into being, the workloads of manufacturing, distributing, and also injecting could be extremely heavy as well. So what do you make of the prospect and one wave of challenge after another, it seems?
Yeah, COVAX is a very important initiative. This is the WHO platform. We must make sure that we ramp up manufacturing capacity early on, and that is happening. It's the WHO, it's individual governments, it's like institutions like BARDA in the United States. The Chinese government is doing a lot. The EU Commission. So we see very good progress on this. But we must be realistic. If we have a vaccine, it will take some time to scale up the process, and then governments are also looking very deeply into logistics. Some of these vaccines need to be stored at -70 degrees, so you have to have a very well functioning cold chain, and that needs to go down to the community vaccine centers that are currently being set up. But I'm fairly optimistic that governments will be able to manage this task. COVAX is also about access to vaccines in low-income countries, and different governments are contributing a lot a lot to that.
On the other hand, even with the COVAX goal totally achieved, it is only 20% of the world's population by the end of next year, 2021. Will that be enough for us as a whole, I mean human being as a whole, be able to handle this pandemic by the end of next year? Or the number has to be much higher, probably 60 and 70%, or we just don't know at this point, Mr. Oschmann?
Vaccines play an important role, and as I said early on, we will use a stepwise approach to this. So once we have a vaccine, we will first vaccinate high-risk populations. Yes. If the high-risk populations are better protected, that will reduce the impact of this disease significantly. We also need to make progress on neutralizing antibodies. There are many such projects. There are such projects in China, in India, in the United States, in Europe. And neutralizing antibodies could actually play an important role in protecting people. There's so many companies working on antiviral compounds right now, and many companies such as ours are also working on molecules that could influence the immune response, very important in the treatment of COVID-19. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will be, during the course of the next year, in a situation where we can bring down the risk of this disease to an area where it's manageable.
Very complicated information that we still do not know. So how cautiously optimistic, as you used the word, Mr. Oschmann, can we be together with you?
Yes, that's very true what you're saying. There's so many unknowns about this disease. We have gathered knowledge, so we know a lot more. There have been a few cases of people that got reinfected. Some of these people actually then had a worse progression of the disease. There are effects such as antibody-dependent enhancement. That is something that if you have immunology or if you develop antibodies against a certain virus, that the next infection could actually be worse. So there are all sorts of question marks. We are watching very closely how the virus is mutating. So far, the coronavirus is obviously, like any other virus, is mutating, but the pace in the important areas that define immunity is less than, for instance, in other viruses. So this will remain to be a challenge, and this virus will not go away, and we will continue to search, and it would be simply unprofessional to make any predictions because we simply don't know. Yeah. But as I said, I remain cautiously optimistic.
Well, we are experiencing all these difficulties and unpredictabilities. We're also thinking about the future. Of course, working on the current best way to prepare for the future. But people have been thinking about when it's going to be this great reset, and what does it take, and what would lead us to the triumph, at least a temporary victory over the current difficult stage of challenge we have. As a global CEO and chairman of the board, how do you see all these unpredictabilities and moving factors? How would you make your decisions on a constant basis?
When I was younger,
and I think you're still young, sir, because you have a lot of updated information about everything. Go ahead, sir.
Now, when I was truly a young man, I was involved, for instance, in 10-year planning, 10-year strategic plans. And at that time, let's say in the 1980s, that was possible. Today, who can predict how the world is going to look? We just don't know. So we need to work in scenarios. And for me, the key is a highly capable and agile organization. So what we're focusing on is create the right culture in a company so that you have technically competent people with the right values, the right work ethics, and agile minds. That they're on top of all these trends and can react very fast. And I must say that our people, especially our team in China, has proven that they are such people, and I'm very proud of them.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of World Insight in Shanghai. On behalf of my team here in Shanghai and in Beijing, thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.